And good morning. It's 10 a.m. Eastern and 7 a.m. on the West Coast. I'm Christine Romans. Let's get you current. Breaking now, accused CEO killer Luigi Mangione appearing in court this morning, expected to plead guilty to federal stalking charges, what it could mean for his more serious state case. Also breaking, more severe weather in the already flood-ravaged Midwest. A new storm threat on the way. Maggie Vespa live in the storm zone. New developments in the crisis on board the USS Lincoln. Those sailors now coming home after reports of dire conditions. We'll look at the toll long deployments can take. And the shocking act of vandalism at the World War II Memorial in Washington. An investigation now underway. And good to be with you this busy Friday, August 14th. A lot to get to this morning. Let's begin this hour with breaking news. Accused CEO killer Luigi Mangione is due back in a Manhattan federal court within an hour. Sources tell NBC News that he's expected to enter a guilty plea in his federal case. The terms of that plea still unclear. And if there is a plea, what happens after that? Also unclear. In the federal case, Mangione faces 2 counts of stalking. If convicted, he could face a life sentence. We have team coverage on this story. NBC News correspondent Sam Brock is outside of the Manhattan courthouse. Also with us is Manhattan-based criminal defense attorney Jeremy Saland. Sam, let's start with you. What do we know about this possible guilty plea?
Christine, it's good to be with you. Look, this is likely to be a milestone moment in the Mangione case and legal saga. The reality is, though, there are so many possible permutations. No one knows really what shape that's going to take. Christine, let's rewind it back for a second. The reason that we're here today is because both prosecutors for the federal government and attorneys for Mangione wrote a letter to the federal judge on Tuesday after a state hearing requesting this hearing today. It was not on the docket, right? So there was some movement on something, and now here on Friday morning. With respect to what you were just describing a second ago, sources familiar with the matter and with today's planned hearing tell NBC News that Luigi Mangione is expected to plead guilty to federal charges. But there's a big caveat here, Christine, right? He is facing those 2 federal stalking charges that do come with a possible life sentence. But we don't know if Mangione and his team have actually agreed to those charges specifically or a different deal. So it's federal charges as an umbrella, but not clear if it's stalking or not. There's also the reality that Mangione could get into court today and go through something called allocution. That's where the judge sort of probes, what did you do? What are you acknowledging guilt of? Why did you do that? Mangione at any point in time can either provide answers that are not sufficient to meet her criteria, or he can decide to not plead guilty altogether. So these are sort of all the different directions that it could go. There's also many folks who are probably wondering, why would the federal government in this case cut a deal with Luigi Mangione, especially since they were initially pursuing capital punishment before the judge threw out the charge that would have enabled that to happen? There's a couple of possible answers. One of them is that there's been so much energy, so much eccentricity, and so many people who have been advocating on behalf of Luigi Mangione nationally. He raised somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.5 million, that perhaps the feds don't want to put themselves in a position where just one juror who might be sympathetic to Mangione or bring an ideological bent to the case could change the outcome of everything. There is also an interesting point here that generally in plea deals, Christine, you have a scenario where the defendant will waive their right to appeal, so it becomes more of an open and closed case. There's this old saying for prosecutors that if someone is willing to plead guilty to the top line of counts, that is sort of like a slam dunk scenario where you would move forward. Is that what's going on here? We don't know. The other thing that I would point out, there's been a lot of conversation around the topic of double jeopardy and the fact that in New York State, you have charges that are second-degree murder and weapons charges. So that's obviously a more elevated crime from the stalking charges that are present in the federal jurisdiction. It is entirely possible that a state judge would decide, if Mangione does plead guilty today, that this would constitute double jeopardy, that there would be a criminal transaction, even though the charges aren't exactly the same, stalking and murder, that were underlined by the same criminal behavior. And if they find that, could toss out the state case. That is, though, sort of shrouded in mystery and ambiguity because it's not sort of an open or closed case in that regard. It really is going to depend upon the discretion of the judge. One last point. The judge today is not going to be sentencing Mangione if he pleads guilty, but whenever that sentencing actually happens, let's say hypothetically it's in a couple of weeks, she gets the sentencing guidelines or whatever was agreed to between parties, but Judge Garnett doesn't have to adhere to that. Christine, she can decide based on the totality of circumstances, what she knows happened in New York and Pennsylvania, what Mangione says in court, to decide what she feels is the best punishment. And former federal prosecutors that I'm talking to tell me they think it is extremely likely that if Luigi Mangione is to plead guilty, he would be facing something very close to life in prison, if not, in fact, a life sentence. So there's just so many layers, so much complexity to all of this, and hopefully we're going to find out some answers in the next hour or so.
Yeah, and Sam, quickly, are we hearing anything before this hearing from prosecutors or the defense this morning?
So we have asked both the defense team and also DOJ prosecutors whether or not they would even confirm a deal. They declined to comment. They did confirm the actual hearing, which is about to start here at about 11 o'clock Eastern, but they wouldn't provide any detail on the contours of a deal, which is why we're sort of all stuck in limbo right now, waiting to find out what he agreed to, Mangione, if in fact he did, and whether he'll actually plead guilty in court.
All right, Sam Brock, we're going to let you get inside the courthouse now to cover this for us. Thanks, Sam. Jeremy, bringing you in here, what is the legal strategy if he were to plead guilty to these federal stalking charges? What is the strategy for Mangione's team?
It's pretty straightforward. Again, federally, this dual sovereignty rule allows these two competing, or not necessarily competing, two jurisdictional cases to proceed. But New York is strict, it's tight, it's different. It says you can't do that when it stems from the underlying same offense, same criminal transaction. And these are different charges and different elements to a certain extent. One's, again, we know, are murder charges, and the other relates to stalking. But if we as the defense can say, you made that allocution, you have pleaded, and now you have done this in federal court, you've knocked out the state case, and now I'm not going to Attica. I'm not going to Sing Sing. I'm going to be in federal custody, even if it's still potentially my life incarceration.
So this is an attempt by his legal team to get the best possible outcome for Luigi Mangione.
Yeah, why are we going to try two cases? You know, there was a time, if you recall, that Judge Caro, who's a state judge, said, I will entertain this application about there being a double jeopardy issue, but it's not ripe right now. There's no plea. This gets them to that point. This avoids two trials.
Why are there two cases? Why are there two separate prosecutions of this man?
I'm so glad you're asking me that question, because I think there absolutely, unequivocally should not be. The federal government has no business in this case. It may ruffle feathers and it may sound, well, why are you saying that? I think the federal government, what we call big-footed, if that's a term of art that's used to say basically they came in and took from the state this case, which is a murder case, which murder cases are generally handled by the state. And we don't see the Southern District routinely going after bad actors who stalk people across state lines, for example, domestic violence cases, which these types of stalking charges are ripe for and great for, and regularly prosecuting domestic abusers who kill women across state lines with firearms. You see them prosecuted in the state. We saw what happened when Mangione came back to New York, and it was like he was landing on an aircraft carrier, and this was some declaration, and the federal government scooped him up. This is really ego-driven. I hate to say it, and what's lost here is Brian Thompson's death. It should be the main focus, and his family. And that was being handled by the Manhattan District Attorney's Office.
Yeah, a father of two, an Iowa native who, really from a small town in Iowa, who went on to run UnitedHealthcare and then became sort of the face of this horrible crime. Often we just talk about Luigi Mangione,
right,
not Brian Thompson. I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you so much. We're going to talk to you again. We're going to continue to follow this over the next couple of hours. Thanks, Jeremy. And we've got Sam Brock heading into the courtroom, as you can see there. All right, we're going to monitor all these developments throughout the hour and bring you the latest as we get it. We're also tracking those unrelenting storms drenching the Midwest now for a sixth day in a row. New evacuation orders issued in parts of Indiana where river levels crested at record heights overnight. Look at that. Water as high as mailboxes, roads completely submerged, crews navigating streets by boat to rescue people trapped by the floodwaters. And the rain is not over yet. 17 million people are under flood watches today from Iowa to West Virginia. Hundreds of thousands across the region are still without power. At least 3 storm-related deaths have been reported this week. Meteorologist Angie Lastman will have the forecast for us in just a moment, but I want to begin with NBC News correspondent Maggie Vespa. Maggie has been in Indiana for us. Maggie, more flooding, more evacuation orders, now a statewide disaster emergency in place. Tell us what you're seeing on the ground.
I mean, Christine, it's like the worst version of Groundhog Day possible. I'm not sure if you can see this on camera, but it's starting to rain once again here in Anderson, Indiana, which is like the last thing this area needs, obviously. This is flooding from the White River, the one that crested at historic highs around 2 a.m., close to 25 feet. That's the one that's flooding this area. And again, it's just been a week of unrelenting storms, unrelenting rain. That's clearly wreaking havoc. More relentless rain hammering the Midwest.
Holy smokes.
Combined with destructive winds gusting up to 75 miles per hour. This after days of high water rescues in Indiana. This man climbing out of his vehicle with a dog to escape a flooded road. In the city of Anderson, evacuation orders issued late Thursday with the White River cresting overnight at nearly 25 feet, a new record. In nearby Cambridge City, residents wading through water to get back to their flooded homes.
I'm afraid it's not over.
For many, the reality of what's left is overwhelming. I'm so sorry. How are you even taking this in right now?
I'm not. Everything's gone.
That is more rain that you're going to get in probably 100 years.
Indiana's governor declaring a statewide disaster emergency with more than 200,000 still without power.
Holy!
This after a punishing run of severe storms across several states. In South Dakota, lightning striking just feet from state troopers. Meanwhile, Hawaii bracing for what could be the first hurricane to make landfall on the Big Island, with tropical storm Lala still strengthening as it approaches. A week of violent weather leaving devastation in its wake.
Maggie, you've been talking to folks there who've really lost everything. There's some heartbreaking stories from people talking to you.
Yeah, Christine, there really are. And, you know, something that we keep hearing from people who have lived in this area, this state, their entire life is that, number one, they've never seen anything like this, which obviously tracks with the, historic river levels, historic flooding that we're seeing. Number two, a lot of different stories about people learning some hard truths about insurance and flood insurance, many of whom, frankly, don't have flood insurance. Now they're praying that the state or FEMA somehow steps in. The state issuing that disaster declaration. But right now, all that's meant is that state agencies are helping with the cleanup and, helping people get out if they need to. Another woman that we talked to in that piece, that couple you heard, and I'll reiterate, she said they do have flood insurance, but they learned on the day that their house was flooding that it doesn't cover most of their possessions. So even people with that coverage, so to speak, may have lost everything. Christine.
All right, Maggie Vesco for us in Indiana. Thanks so much, Maggie. Okay, joining us now, NBC News meteorologist Angie Lassman. Angie, the rain just will not let up. How much longer is this expected to stick around?
Unfortunately, Christine, we don't have great news for folks in some of those same spots. The Midwest gets no rest so far. We've still got some of these kind of really active thunderstorms and even heavy rain in some spots ongoing across those same locations, stretching from Nebraska across parts of Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, and even farther west from Ohio into West Virginia so far this morning. This is going to be the setup that we see continuing through the rest of our day today. All on that periphery of that heat dome is where we'll see those stronger storms kind of firing up with that heavy rain. It's worth mentioning that climate change, of course, exacerbates these heavy rainfall events, adding that moisture to the atmosphere, and that means that we're oftentimes seeing more frequent and heavier rainfall in some of these spots that, as Maggie said, they haven't seen it before. We've still got the flooding concern across parts of the Midwest, but the severe risk is much smaller. Still, it's not zero, so some tornadoes, isolated, maybe some strong winds and hail possible. And then tomorrow, that severe risk shifts across parts of Michigan, stretching down into the Carolinas with those same threats on the table. The flooding, a big concern again today. You can see the worst spot for it that we're most concerned about, Des Moines to Peoria, but pretty expansive when you add in the fact that folks in these areas have, Christine, received up to a foot of rain in some spots, and there's additional kind of even a couple of inches is going to worsen what they're already dealing with.
Yeah, I'm basically seeing everybody in my family in that zone right there. It has been real tough. Officials also tracking a tropical storm heading toward Hawaii. How's that shaping up?
Right. We've also got some flooding concerns for our friends in the Hawaiian island chain. We've got tropical storm Lala kind of eyeing the islands, and we've got hurricane warnings up for the Big Island and a tropical storm watch to the points north and west of that for the rest of the islands. Here's what we've got so far. Winds at 60 miles per hour. This is kind of getting its act together, and we do expect it to become a hurricane before it kind of either skirts just to the south of the Big Island or moves directly over it. You can see that cone does include parts of the southern half of the island as we get into the later parts of Saturday. Notice, though, it likely will become a Category 1 hurricane by tomorrow morning. The impacts for the island will start tonight. It'll be the heavy rain, in addition to the strong winds and especially those elevated locations. But the rainfall is going to be just downright impressive, Christine. We could be looking at upwards of 25 inches of rain in some of these spots. We know the topography of the island. That is problematic when it comes to not just flooding, but also the mudslides. We'll also see some issues with those damaging winds, and the coastal areas. The dangerous surf will be on the table, too.
All right, Angie, and thanks for bringing us up to speed, Angie. We are following breaking news out of Washington. The Trump administration has asked the Supreme Court to allow construction of the White House ballroom to continue. Today's emergency application just days after a federal appeals court blocked work on the building while the legal fight moves forward. President Trump says the ballroom is necessary for national security. This morning, the Pentagon is disputing reports of poor conditions aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln, and the Navy now says another carrier is on its way to replace the Lincoln in the Middle East. The carrier has been on a record deployment as part of the ongoing war in Iran. The mother of one sailor telling NBC the problems have been building for months.
I'm not just talking a one isolated incident where he complains about the conditions. This has been trending and spiraling downward since about March or April, with no supplies, food shortages, low morale.
NBC Chief White House correspondent Garrett Hake joins us now with the latest. Garrett.
The sailors and Marines aboard the USS Abraham Lincoln have been through a deployment now so long that they have not set foot on dry land in 2026. Reports of the conditions aboard that ship and of disturbing man overboard incidents first began to surface in military-focused news outlets like the Military Times. And now more family members are speaking out and lawmakers are demanding answers. This morning, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth responding after reports of deteriorating conditions and morale aboard U.S. ships deployed in the war against Iran. The problems reportedly most acute aboard the aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln, at sea now for a record 244 consecutive days.
Completely misrepresented. Listen, we make sure at every ship, every crew, every captain has everything we can provide them at every single moment. Some deployments are longer than others.
The more than 5,000 sailors and Marines on board the Lincoln have not set foot on land since December. Danielle Rappa's son is on board.
He describes the overall experience as a scene out of the American Horror Story, where he feels like everybody is dead, but they don't know it yet.
According to multiple U.S. officials, there have also been some concerning man overboard incidents on the Lincoln. The Pentagon now says a sailor went overboard earlier this month and is receiving care off the ship, as one Democratic senator is highlighting other reported issues on board, including, quote, shortages of basic supplies, water contamination, plumbing issues, deteriorating mental health, and deck safety concerns, along with mail delays. A U.S. official telling NBC News that fresh food has been limited, while the Pentagon saying, quote, leadership prioritized mission-critical supplies, first food, then hygiene items, then mail. Melody Stowe says her daughter has been aboard the ship since last October.
So it's a little bit longer than she anticipated. They've had issues with supplies arriving late.
According to a U.S. official, the Lincoln is now set to sail home, replaced by the USS George Washington in the coming weeks. And now a growing number of lawmakers from both parties are demanding answers.
At what point do these issues become a national security concern?
They're a national security concern right now. It performs vital missions in projecting our power and the credibility of our forces.
Those who are serving have to have, comfort knowing that, they're getting properly taken care of.
Those sailors and Marines aboard the Lincoln will soon be getting home, but only after a handoff process with the George Washington when it arrives from the Pacific, and then a roughly 2-week sail back to the Lincoln's home port in San Diego.
All right, Garrett Hake, thank you so much. Let's bring in NBC News military analyst and former Pentagon spokesperson, Colonel Steve Warren. Colonel Warren, you heard that mother describing food shortages, dwindling supplies, low morale, her son even comparing his experiences to American Horror Story. What's your reaction to hearing conditions described that way aboard a U.S. Navy aircraft carrier?
Yeah, it's been a long deployment, right? It's been a long, difficult deployment. The Navy has not faced a deployment of this intensity, I would say, for many, many years, really since the Iraq War. And in this case, what's unique about this particular deployment is the fact that they haven't really had a chance to set foot on land for almost 9 months. You know, a carrier deployment is normally 6 to 9 months long, so that's not unusual. But what happens during those 6 to 9 months is the carriers pull into various ports around the world, and the sailors get off, and they have some shore leave, and they resupply, and they get a chance to settle down and reset, blow off some steam. They haven't had that opportunity while they've been under the simultaneous pressure of active combat operations. So it's really taking its toll.
Yeah, talk to me a little bit about the strain that comes with these longer deployments. And you mentioned they're in a war zone. There is an active combat situation happening there. So that must be a level of stress and anxiety that is different from a normal deployment.
Well, it certainly is. And understand that a United States Navy aircraft carrier is this extraordinarily complex system of systems. And they're doing so much all the time. They're conducting flight operations, you know, launching jets, recovering jets at sea, on the move, often at night. They're defending themselves from Iranian drones and missile attacks. They're always nervous that something bad is going to happen. On top of that, they have a nuclear reactor that they have to keep operating. That's a lot to do. All of that under combat conditions, it's tough.
All right, Colonel Steve Warren, thank you so much. Talk again soon. Much more ahead on current, including President Trump's handpicked Kennedy Center board defying a judge. The path now open to get Trump's name back on that building. Plus, the new lawsuit against Selena Gomez and her mother are accused of fraud tied to their mental health startup. We have the details. And the critical hearing today for disgraced South Carolina attorney Alex Murdaugh as he awaits a retrial on charges he murdered his family. We'll get you current after the break. A case of vandalism at the World War II Memorial at the Capitol, and so far no arrests. The fountain bubbled over with soap suds yesterday and was splattered with red and green paint. The phrase, "clean hands, dirty money," with the $ symbol was painted on one surface. Joining us now, NBC News senior justice reporter Ryan Riley. Ryan, this memorial is in an area of D.C. that really sees a lot of tourist traffic. The Department of the Interior says there is an investigation ongoing. Any leads on who did this?
Yeah, no arrest thus far that we've seen, but we did see this statement from the government saying that, you know, there are many places in our country for expression, debate, and disagreement. A national memorial honoring those who served and those who never returned home should never be used as a canvas for vandalism. You know, obviously that's an extremely important spot in America. You know, have had these flights of individuals, of veterans come in to visit that memorial. That's been an ongoing in D.C. For years. And so, a very important spot there. But, it's getting a little bit mixed up with some of the other incidents, that unrelated incidents that we've seen regarding, other key locations, including that reflecting pool nearby to this monument. You have new reaction from the president. What did he say? Yeah, that's right. He described, these individuals as animals and said that they're, hot on their trail, whoever committed this act. But I think it's, important to separate here. This was clearly an act of vandalism that we saw at the World War II Memorial. But the reflecting pool had all of these issues with the contractor. And that's the government's own representation in court filings, because they initially charged someone who they later dropped the charges against. That was all, the reflecting pool incidents were because of contractor error, whereas obviously when you have talking about an incident with spray painting, it's unclear what the motive was behind this, but obviously sort of a different category, an actual act of vandalism, as opposed to some of the stuff that we saw at the reflecting pool. All right, Ryan Riley in D.C. for us. Thanks, Ryan. From a major shift in U.S. cyber policy to a lawsuit against Harvard dismissed. Let's get you politically current this morning. A federal judge dismisses a Trump administration lawsuit against Harvard. That suit alleged the university had failed to protect Jewish and Israeli students from harassment. The judge ruled the administration did not prove ongoing violations of civil rights on the Ivy League's campus. No response yet from either Harvard or the White House.
To the shakeup at the White House press podium, a senior administration official tells NBC News the president does intend to replace Caroline Leavitt as White House press secretary, but that he's not in any hurry to do so. Leavitt, a staunch Trump ally and defender, is expected to leave at the end of the month. The administration is now empowering American companies to conduct their own cyber attacks against hackers. It's a move the White House says will help combat criminal hacks and trends like ransomware attacks. It is a huge shift in U.S. cyber policy. Critics warn it will only unleash legal and digital chaos. Coming up, a jury now seated in the Tupac Shakur murder trial when opening statements are expected to begin. Plus, we'll go back to a New York City courthouse ahead of a hearing for accused CEO killer Luigi Mangione, expected to plead guilty to federal charges. We have more current right after this. From a jury seated in the Tupac murder trial to the spread of cyclospora, let's get you current on the other headlines we're following today. Michigan is now reporting nearly 14,000 cases of cyclosporiasis. That's up about 11% in just a week. But state health officials say much of that increase is from a backlog in processing cases. They say cases are actually slowing and the worst of this outbreak may be over. The outbreak has reached 17 states and linked to iceberg lettuce. Selena Gomez and her mother are facing a lawsuit over their mental health startup. The suit alleges Gomez, her mother, and other founders falsely presented plans to make the company Wondermind profitable, including promises of an app, big ad deals, and celebrity cover stories. One of Gomez's co-founders called the allegations categorically false. No comment from Gomez or her mom. A jury is now in place for the trial of the former gang leader accused of ordering Tupac Shakur's killing. Dwayne Kefi D. Davis is accused of helping orchestrate the 1996 drive-by shooting that killed the rapper. The case is now moving forward in Las Vegas, with the opening statements expected Monday. Davis has pleaded not guilty. Now back to our breaking news. The accused CEO killer Luigi Mangione due back in New York City court in about a half hour. Sources tell NBC News that he's expected to plead guilty in his federal case. Brian Thompson's family arrived in the courthouse in Manhattan just moments ago. Thompson was a father of two who grew up in Iowa, rose to become the CEO of UnitedHealthcare. Defense attorneys for Mangione also just arriving. He's facing 2 counts of stalking in this case, which have a maximum sentence of life in prison. In his separate state case, Mangione is facing several other charges, including second-degree murder. Back with us outside of the Manhattan courthouse, NBC News correspondent Stephanie Gosk. NBC News legal analyst Angela Sanadella is also with us, and Manhattan-based criminal defense attorney Jeremy Saland is also back. Stephanie, any update from prosecutors or the defense here?
Yeah, not yet, Christine. They haven't said anything. The defense team, as you say, just went in. They didn't make any comment at all. This hearing is supposed to start at 11 a.m., and it's important to understand that there is no plea deal until it happens in court and the judge accepts it. A couple of things to look for in this hearing today. The first, I would say, is allocution. So that is, once the plea deal, Luigi Mangione stands up and agrees to the plea deal, the judge is effectively going to say to him, describe what you did. Tell us what the crime was, so that the judge hears how it went down. So we will be hearing, most likely, in his own words, Luigi Mangione describe the crime. That's one thing to look for. The second thing to look for is Brian Thompson's family. Now, soon after Brian Thompson was killed here in Midtown Manhattan, his wife did make some comments, but we have not heard from the family since then. And in federal court, the family is allowed to weigh in on any potential plea deal. So we may hear from the family or hear from them at some point during this hearing. All of this to say that there are an enormous amount of questions that remain on what happens next. What are the barriers, the constructs of this plea deal? What happens going forward? And what does that mean for the state case? That state case is supposed to start on September 8th. And at this point, it seems at a bare minimum, if there is a plea deal on the federal case, that timeline is going to be pushed down. And it is entirely likely that there is no state trial at all, which means there will not be a trial for Luigi Mangione, Christine.
You know, we just saw Brian Thompson's family entering a side door there, Stephanie. We know the courtroom is slowly filling up with members of the public and the press. Talk to us about timing here. How soon could we hear from the judge?
Yes, Yes, we will hear from the judge for sure when the hearing begins, and there are going to be a number of questions that are going to be asked. You know, the judge is going to make sure that this plea deal is locked up. You may remember from the Brian Kohlberger case, that was the Idaho murders case, that there were a series of questions that the judge asked. Things like, you understand what you have agreed to, you have not been coerced into this agreement. A lot of that kind of thing will be asked because that buttons up the a plea deal. And then, as I mentioned, a description. Luigi Mangione will have to give a description of what he did, Christine.
All right. Thanks so much, Steph Gosk, for that. Let's bring it back to the legal eagles here. Angela, what's the best possible outcome and the worst possible outcome for Luigi Mangione?
Okay, so if he pleads guilty, the relevant context here is that these federal charges are just for stalking. He got the murder charge here dropped, but the state trial that is upcoming is for murder. So the reason why pleading guilty here could be his best case scenario is because through the doctrine of double jeopardy, which in New York State is significant, it is possible then that his lawyers could get that state charge of murder dropped. But the worst case scenario is that if he does plead guilty here in federal court, he's admitting that he did all of these bad things that he is on trial for, right? And that admission then could be included in state trial. If those charges are not dropped at the state trial, that means then he is admitting openly that he has done everything that he could possibly then be convicted for murder.
Jeremy, it's so interesting. This is really legal drama unfolding before our very eyes here. I mean, we don't know exactly what's going to happen. The indications are that he's going to plead guilty to these stalking charges. Again, there are two different cases here happening. One is the state one is the federal case. Is his team jockeying here that they might have some sort of double jeopardy argument that they can make?
Absolutely. And they're looking at Paul Manafort and they're saying it worked for him. It could work for
Remind us what happened there.
So what happened there is that was a federal charge and a federal case there. And ultimately the state took those almost exact same charges, underlying circumstances and set of facts, and prosecuted on the state level. And New York said, and no, you can't do that because double jeopardy applies. You're out of the box, New York. The feds came first. You're second in time. You're done. That's what we're playing for here if I'm the defense. Yes, there's a risk that if it doesn't go through, what I say in court as Mangione can be used against me later on. But let's be real here. His defense is weak realistically on the facts and on the evidence that we've seen in court. So this is really the best strategy after we've already tried the extreme emotional distress possible defense that may rear its head if this fails. But how do we get this case and get rid of anything and going to Attica, going to that Shawshank-type prison upstate New York? We deal with the feds, we take a plea with the feds, and the state case is done.
Let's rewind a little bit here because you had these federal charges that were launched. And in the beginning, it seemed as though the state was going to take the lead and the state was going to prosecute first. But then things changed, and now you've got sort of this legal muddle here.
Yeah, we sort of mentioned that before, and I brought that up before. Generally speaking, a murder case, a murder charge, is a state case. That is why Manhattan, as in the Manhattan District Attorney's Office in the state of New York, prosecuted this matter. They are the ones who did the homework, meaning the investigation with the NYPD and the other jurisdictions. They are the ones who let out and had the suppression hearing. Mm-hmm. We would expect that this would be prosecuted in a state court. It really should never have been in a federal court, other than the term I used before, bigfooting, because it is a sensational case. And I said it again, and I'll say it now. We don't want to forget Brian Thompson. Whatever the final outcome is, if there is a plea, it's about Brian Thompson.
I can't imagine what his family is thinking right now, coming in through that side door, that courtroom, trying to figure out what is next here. Don't go far, because there's a lot happening in the next 20, 25 minutes or so. Thank you both. All right, we're looking at a live look at South Carolina court, where a pretrial hearing for accused murderer Alec Murdaugh is happening right now. Murdaugh is in plain clothes, unshackled for the first time since he was found guilty of murdering his wife and youngest son back in 2023. Now, that conviction was overturned by the state's high court in May because of jury tampering by the court clerk. Murdaugh's retrial is slated for next year. In the meantime, Murdaugh remains in prison, where he is serving both a federal and state sentence for financial crimes. Joining us now, NBC News correspondent Jesse Kirsch. Jesse, we're looking at those pictures at this hearing right now. What are we learning?
Yeah, so what we're seeing right now is the judge go down the line, a laundry list, if you will, of different motions from both the defense and prosecution. And I'm following along with our producer, Juliet Arcodio, who's taking fantastic notes for us in the courtroom and what we're hearing from the feed from the court right now. And the judge just was weighing in on the matter of whether or not the results of a polygraph examination can be a part of this forthcoming trial. And the judge saying that she is ruling that the results of a polygraph polygraph examination are not admissible, as well as the defendant's willingness or refusal to submit to a polygraph. So I'm reading off of a rough transcript that's coming in right now. So we'll polish that off as the day goes on. But that is the matter that was just handled in the courtroom right there. But there's a long list of topics that could be covered today, Christine. Among them, the defense asking to be able to test mystery male DNA that was found under Alec Murdaugh's murdered wife's fingernails, and see if they can take that DNA sample and take it to an outside lab for testing. The defense pointing to advancements in technology, including artificial intelligence, that have come forward since the original murder trial. And I should say, by the way, his killed wife's fingernails, because a reminder, he is no longer a convicted murderer. That conviction overturned, as you mentioned, and so he is now facing the trial again. He has proclaimed his innocence throughout this process, but regardless of how this plays out, Christine, this trial that's upcoming, he's not going anywhere, so to speak, because he is still facing years behind bars because of financial crimes, separate from the murder charges that he now faces.
And he is trying, his team at least, is trying to get this retrial dismissed outright. What else is on the list of topics today?
Yeah, another thing they're trying to talk about potentially is getting the trial moved to Charleston. Right now they're in Lexington, that is near the state capital of Columbia. So the defense, one of the things they want to do is get the trial moved to Charleston, a major city. So we will see if the judge gets to that topic. Among others, she did indicate early on she's not going to rule on everything that was on the list today, Christine.
All right, Jesse Kirsch, thanks so much, Jesse. All right, how current are you on the week's news? We'll quiz you throughout the show. Our first question this Friday, the U.S. just had its hottest month on record. What was the nation's average temperature? The potential answers are there on your screen. Scan the code if you want to get the quiz sent to your phone by downloading the NBC News app. We'll share the answer later this hour. All right, after the break, the fallout in England after controversial politician Nigel Farage wins a parliamentary election, defeating the man in the can. Plus, the dramatic violent standoff in the West Bank with Israeli settlers attempting to force Palestinian families from their homes. We'll get you current after this. In the Middle East, renewed violence in the occupied West Bank this week. A group of Israeli settlers trapping Palestinian families inside their homes, cutting them off from food, water, and power. NBC News international correspondent Matt Bradley was in the West Bank and spoke to some of those families.
Standoff in the West Bank. Security camera footage from Palestinian homes shows Israeli Jewish settlers trapping 2 Palestinian families in these houses, using rocks to block Israeli military trucks from reaching the site, and even fighting with Israeli soldiers and border guards sent to clear them away. But this latest sighting of settler violence attracting global condemnation. U.S. Ambassador to Israel Mike Huckabee, known for his pro-Israeli stance, called the settlers terrorists whose thuggish behavior should be punished. The IDF said today that it had dispersed the settlers, but when we went, we found several were still there.
You can see right now there are settlers running right along in black, just below those homes that are now under siege.
The settler siege depriving families inside of food, water, and cutting off their electricity. All we have left is a little bread, a little halawa, this cheese, a tomato, said the home's owner in a video asking for help. Would you accept me coming into your home, living there, and forcing you out, said the town's mayor. We keep speaking out, but no one listens to us. No one tells our story to the world. Karim Hassan's children are in the houses. To keep watch on his daughter, he's sleeping here.
He says this has been his house since January of this year. His car.
Hours ago, he was told that soldiers took his daughter's phone. After an anxious wait, he finally got through to her. Are they harassing you, he asks. No, they aren't, she says of the soldiers, but they told us not to go outside. The residents here say the soldiers haven't been doing enough to protect them. They accuse the military of working with the settlers to force out the Palestinians. They point to a video earlier this week that showed IDF soldiers praying with the settlers, inciting accusations of collusion. The IDF said disciplinary action would be taken against the security personnel involved. But for the Palestinian families who live here, discipline seems in short supply.
Matt Bradley, NBC News.
All right, in the UK, a right-wing populist candidate, Nigel Farage, is the winner of a special election for Parliament. Farage triggered the race after stepping down from his seat last month. He's facing scrutiny over his finances. No candidates from Britain's main political parties ran against him, but there was one candidate who did make waves in the seaside town of Clacton. Count Binface, the comedian, is a popular figure in UK politics. He's run in a number of British elections. He clinched 27% of yesterday's vote, a personal best for the self-described man in a can.
I've had over 9,000 votes, guys. Now, in Makerfield, 8 weeks ago, I got 95 votes. So against Nigel Farage, compared to Andy Burnham, I am 1,000 times more popular.
Joining us now, NBC News correspondent Danielle Hamamdjan. Danielle, Farage really forced this election. He's claiming a resounding victory, that the people have spoken here. Break down the results for us.
Yeah, 63% of the vote is what Nigel Farage got in the end. His victory is not all that surprising. He called it overwhelming, convincing. But the fact that the major parties, Labour and Conservative, didn't run a candidate kind of undermines, in the eyes of many, his win, but also the framing of this election, which he said right off the bat was about the people versus the establishment. And so a reminder of how we got here. He abruptly quit Parliament once an investigation into a $6.7 million gift was received that he did not declare. He said he did nothing wrong and he was going to put it to the people. The people were going to judge. And so the main parties saw this as a stunt. They boycotted it. But in the end, voters in the constituency yesterday had 34 names to vote from. It was a very long ballot paper, the longest in history. You had very eccentric characters from the monster raving loony party to Count Binface, who, as you say, won 27% of the vote. That's 9,000 people. He's an Oxford-educated comedian who had said prior to the election day, listen, he knows that Farage was likely to win, but he said morally here, the best Farage could say is that he beat a guy with a garbage can over his head. Nigel Farage did not attend this morning's public count with all the contenders standing next to him. This is what he had to say. Take a listen.
I regret to say, and by the way, I'm not scared of these people, far from it. But I'm damned if I'm going to stand on a stage having won a resounding victory, a ringing endorsement of all that I've tried to fight for and you try to fight for, and be demeaned and humiliated by nobodies. And I will not, sadly, be attending the count.
And that investigation is now back on now that Nigel Farage, Christine, has been re-elected. Back to you.
All right, Danielle Hamamdjan, thank you so much for that. So how current are you? Earlier in our news quiz, we asked what was the nation's average temperature last month during the hottest month on record in the U.S. The answer, 76.9 degrees Fahrenheit. A report from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration said July 2026 was not only the warmest July, but also the warmest month in the agency's 132 years of record keeping. If this was fun, you're going to want to download the NBC News app to get the full quiz sent to your phone on Saturday morning. A good way to stay current and keep it fun. Right, when we come back, we return to New York federal court, where we expect Luigi Mangione to plead guilty in his federal case. Our live coverage continues after a short break. And good morning. I'm Christine Romans. At this hour, we're following breaking news in a New York City courtroom. Accused CEO killer Luigi Mangione expected to plead guilty in his federal case. All of it unfolding this morning in Manhattan federal court. Mangione is accused of gunning down UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson on a New York City street 2 years ago. He is charged with 2 federal counts: interstate stalking resulting in death and stalking through use of interstate facilities resulting in death. The charges carry a maximum penalty of life in prison. They are separate from the state allegations, which include second-degree murder and firearms crimes. NBC News has learned that several members of Brian Thompson's family, as well as executives from UnitedHealthcare, are in attendance for this hearing. This will be the first time any family members of Brian Thompson are in the same room with Mangione. His defense attorneys, Mark and Karen Agnifilo, are at the defense table right now. Not clear if members of Mangione's family, we do know that they are there in the courtroom. We'll see We're going to have some team coverage of just what's happened. They're not in the room at the hour, we're told. Now, joining us now from outside the Manhattan Federal District of the Manhattan Federal Courthouse, NBC News correspondent Stephanie Gosk. Also with us, my colleague, NBC News Now anchor Joe Fryer, NBC News legal analyst Angela Senadella, and former federal prosecutor and legal analyst Barrett Berger. Okay, Stephanie, what new details do we have here this hour?
Sam, thank you.
Well, as you mentioned, the family and the executives are going to be in the courtroom. We saw them enter through a side door. We have not heard from executives or the family since the immediate hours after the Brian Thompson's murder. His wife actually spoke, but we haven't heard from them since. And part of the federal process, if there is a plea deal, the family of the victim in this case is allowed to be part of it, or at least to stand up and say something about it. So we could actually hear from them. Who are we also going to hear from in the court today? Obviously, the judge. And this is not a plea deal until the judge accepts it. And the judge is also going to ask Luigi Mangione a series of questions on what he understands this plea deal to be. And we do not know at this point what the parameters of the deal are or what he is going to agree as part of it. There are two charges for stalking that led to death. So that is what's at issue right now. And then the judge is going to ask him to explain what happened in his own words. Beyond that, that means that there is no federal trial, but it raises huge questions on whether or not there is going to be a state trial, which is scheduled to begin on September 8th. And at a bare minimum, that trial will likely move down the road. And it is possible, because of issues of double jeopardy, that trial doesn't happen at all. And that could be at the heart of what the defense's strategy is here with this plea deal, Christine.
So do we have any information yet to which federal charges Mangione could be pleading guilty to? We're still waiting to find out what exactly this whole plea is about.
Yeah, exactly. We need to know what they agreed to. We need to know what was offered on both sides. There are a number of questions. Why would federal prosecutors pursue this? What do they get out of a plea deal? It certainly does seem that there's an abundance of evidence in this case. And it could be twofold, really. One, they might have some doubts about the jury. I mean, this is one of the most publicized crimes in the history of this country. And there are a lot of people with very strong feelings about the healthcare industry. And there might be a variable that they don't want to deal with. The other possibility, they don't want a lengthy appeals process. If there is a plea deal, there likely will be an agreement that there will be no appeals. So that would effectively end the federal side of this case entirely, Christine.
Okay, let me go to you, Barrett. How risky of a move is all of this for the prosecution if they were to actually plead guilty to these stalking charges in the hopes that there's double jeopardy against the state case?
So I agree with everything she just said about why the federal prosecutors would potentially agree to some sort of a plea here. Anytime you try to take a case to trial, 12 people can disagree, particularly in a case like this that raised really strong emotions. So if you have the chance of a defendant who's going to take a plea to the top count and you know that you can secure a significant sentence, it's almost foolish as a federal prosecutor not to do that. Here, though, it is a significant departure. This was an office that came in very hard charging. If you remember, they had additional counts at first that would have carried the death penalty. Those counts were ultimately dismissed. But so, agreeing to a plea on the stalking charges is a pretty far departure from what was initially charged. All that being said, with this judge in particular, even if Mangione does plead guilty and gets whatever leniency he gets for accepting responsibility, I do not see him getting any sort of a sweetheart deal here. He is still facing an incredibly long time in prison, possibly up to a life sentence, and I don't think he'll be getting a significant break.
I mean, if you had to game it out, how likely is it that his lawyers would be able to dismiss some or all of the charges in the state case by pleading guilty here?
Yeah, so this really resurrects their argument that he is facing double jeopardy. If he is convicted by means of a guilty plea in the federal case, it is absolutely not a given that the state charges would go forward. New York's double jeopardy law is a lot more favorable to defendants than it is on the federal side. So that's why many experts had said, having the state trial go first really made sense because there would be no bar then for the federal case following it. But if the federal case is resolved, he has at least a good faith argument to make in front of the state court judge that these state charges are now exactly the same criminal act or transaction that he pled guilty to in the federal case and that he shouldn't go. So, I don't think it's 100% likely, but he certainly has a better argument than he does now.
Joe, let's bring you in here. Word of a possible plea deal started circulating maybe a couple of weeks ago, but those talks reportedly fell apart. Kind of stunning how quickly this has all come together here.
Yeah, and actually we can kind of look at the images that are inside the courtroom now. Our team's in there. They tell us the defense team is back in the courtroom. They had arrived. They had gone to meet with Mangione in a private cell outside of the courtroom. They're now back in. The defense team is talking with prosecutors. They're shaking hands. Our team basically says that this adversarial relationship up till now seems to have melted away. So that might be a sign of what we're about to see once this hearing gets underway. It was our colleagues at NBC New York who in June started reporting that there were some sort of talks underway between federal prosecutors and Mangione's team. At one point, a deal did seem close in June. Then that seemed to go away. Obviously, either talks went away and picked up later or just continued. It's maybe not surprising now that we've gotten to this point with the state trial so close. If Mangione's attorneys wanted to use this argument that, hey, we have a federal plea deal now because of double jeopardy, the state case needs to go away, they really needed to move now. You have to wonder, and we keep asking this question, why would federal prosecutors want this? Both Steph and Barrett laid out some of the arguments here. It is important to look at the context of this case. The state was involved with it. Then suddenly federal prosecutors came in. A lot of people questioned that. There were initially 4 counts here. And one of those counts, the one of murder through use of a firearm, that was the one that carried the potential for a death penalty. Once the judge earlier this year dismissed that charge, then the death penalty was totally off the table. A lot of people said, well, maybe why do federal prosecutors need to be involved here? If this case gets settled up here in the next few days, clears the way to see what happens with the state case.
Angela, let's reframe the best and worst possible scenarios from the Mangione perspective here.
So look, there is a worst case scenario here where there's no actual plea deal, but he's just going to plead guilty, in which case the sentencing would not necessarily be reduced. It would just be up to the judge. So I'm not sure if we know yet whether or not a plea deal has been reached or if just he's going to have this open plea of guilt in the court. Now, the reason why he would be doing that, though, is because, as we've discussed, this state trial is upcoming. It is supposed to start September 8th, but only if this is resolved. And note, his defense attorneys actually tried to resolve this double jeopardy issue earlier, but the state judge said this cannot be addressed until the federal case is resolved. So it could be that he is still just doing this guilty plea without even having a deal in order to move forward with the state trial, because the state trial is that murder charge. So the worst case scenario, he admits everything openly in court that's used against him at the state trial. He gets no reduction in sentence, and he just gets double sentences from both.
Let's go back to the courthouse because Stephanie Gosk is there, and she has got some information for us about the family of Brian Thompson there in the courthouse discussing the case with U.S. attorneys. What's happening?
Yeah, that's right, Christine. So we've learned that Brian Thompson's mother, Pat Thompson, is among the family members who are in court. We know that they've been conferring with the U.S. attorney. There would have been a lot of coordination between the family and the U.S. attorney. In federal court, the family is allowed to be a part, it is required to be a part of this process. How they feel about a plea deal, they can interject and contribute to that negotiation. We don't know exactly what the U.S. attorney was saying, but they were conferring with each other, most likely discussing how things are going to play out once Luigi Mangione makes his way into the courtroom, Christine.
Can you give us a little sense, Steph, about who is arriving there? I mean, these Mangione appearances in the past have had a flavor of spectacle sometimes, with actual fandom in some cases. What are you seeing there?
Most definitely, Christine. That's a good way of putting it. You know, there are people that some of them have been here since last night to be in place so they could get a seat in this hearing. And we have seen that every time there's a hearing, every time, whether it's in state court or federal court, we see some of his supporters. They call themselves the Mangionistas, and they have been coming to show their support for Luigi Mangione. He also, as you know, has a legal fund that was started even before he was named as a possible killer in this case. And that fund has now raised more than $1.5 million. And so that has created this atmosphere outside of court where we see oftentimes the same faces and those people lined up, spending a lot of time here waiting to get in for this moment that could be so pivotal, completely changing the judicial process for this case, what happens here today in this courtroom.
Joe, this case from the very beginning has gotten so much attention, and his attorneys have actually asked, Mangione's attorneys have asked for the state trial to be televised. How's all that going to work?
Yeah, it kind of builds a little bit off what Steph was saying there, too, this sort of groundswell of support for Mangione. I mean, I should note, she didn't mention here, one of the people in line today was seen deboning a fish while waiting in line. So it does certainly draw a number of characters there. So Mangione's attorneys had actually been arguing in court this should be live streamed and televised. We should note, in New York criminal court, those proceedings just generally are not televised. That's the way the state law is here. Obviously, federal court not televised either. That's why we're not seeing anything come out of there today. Mangione's attorneys were basically arguing for the televised trial. They were referring to what they called the court's secret process. They say it grants access to only 68 journalists, saying it doesn't represent the scores of independent journalists who have an interest in covering these proceedings. Obviously, those independent journalists have fueled some of the support that we've seen from Mangione over the years. Prosecutors basically shot back against this. They called that essentially a baseless accusation. They said this can spread information. It can delegitimize the proceedings. In the end, the judge did say there will be an overflow room in this state trial. So that means more people can get in. They will have a live stream within the courthouse to see what's going on. But this is not going to be live streamed at the state level if this state trial does move forward.
Angela, let's go back and remind our viewers about the charges here. 2 federal charges, stalking charges, and then the charges in the state case, 8 felony charges there. And that's where there's this count of second-degree murder. And there had been reports that members of Brian Thompson's family wanted a murder conviction here. Walk us through the differences of these 2 charges.
Yeah, so first, his defense attorneys were able to get the strongest charge on both sides dismissed, right? So the murder charge federally gone. So the murder charge only still stands at the state level. Now, not only is there murder, there's also small charges as well of criminal possession of a firearm and also criminal possession of other items that are felony. Mm-hmm. But so the biggest issue there obviously is murder. But at the federal level, it's just stalking because they were able to get the murder charge dismissed.
And he had pleaded not guilty to all those federal charges, and that's where we are here right now, where we're expecting a guilty plea. Stay with us, everybody. I want to bring in former Superior Court Judge and U.S. Attorney Carol Lamb. From a judge's perspective, what would you want to hear from the defense today?
Yeah, well, what I would expect the judge will want to hear is some sort of, well, of course, the defendant has to admit the elements of the crime, but for sentencing purposes and for legal decisions about how this case is going to proceed in the future, I would imagine that the judge wants to hear why the defendant is pleading guilty in this case. And it doesn't surprise me that the federal government wanted this case to be resolved before the state case, but look at the big picture. What could potentially happen here is that at the end of the day, this defendant will walk away with 2 stalking charges as a conviction. He may do a long time in prison, but it is potentially true that he would never actually be convicted of murder, which is actually what he did, because as your other commentators have pointed out, the New York state laws are quite favorable to the defendant in these double jeopardy motions. So I think that's what the family is thinking, is that why isn't he answering for the actual crimes that he committed?
I mean, as a judge, how would you approach the double jeopardy concern after this? I mean, this must be in the atmosphere for everything that's happening here today.
Yeah, well, it's a strictly legal issue, and there's going to have to be a lot of parsing about what actually the charges are in the stalking and what he actually admits to, because this isn't a slam dunk federal case on stalking. You know, stalking federally requires some sort of anticipation by the victim, that some sort of fear on their part. And in this case, it appears that Mangione simply shot the victim in the back. I mean, there was no actual fear leading up to it. So it's not a slam dunk federal case, which is probably why they're willing to take the plea in it. So it's not really a question for the federal judge to decide what's going to happen with the state court. The state court, it is the state court judge who's going to have to look very carefully at the charges that were alleged and the facts that were admitted by the defendant to decide whether or not he's guilty of these crimes. You know, what I really don't like to see in these kinds of cases is a lack of cooperation between the federal and the state prosecutors. That makes everything a little bit fraught and a little bit messy. And unfortunately, I think that's what we have here.
And there had been some time, Your Honor, where they had been, each team had been operating as if theirs was the only set of charges here, and that has led us to where we are today. You also have experience as a federal prosecutor. What do you think the prosecution strategy is today?
Yeah, well, I think the prosecution's strategy should be to get, quote, the best deal they can. So in other words, they should be giving up as little as possible, and they should be getting as much as possible. So I hope the situation is not simply that they've given away the store, so to speak, and agreed to a lower sentence, lower than he deserves. That would be a surprise to me, but it's possible that they're taking that position simply because they are concerned about the legal arguments here on the stalking. Again, what I don't like to see is a situation where they've sort of pulled the rug out from the state case so that they can kind of come out and claim victory in a way that is going to jeopardize the prosecutions, and I say that in the plural, the prosecutions as a whole. That's what we're going to have to listen for this morning.
Very good analysis. Stay with us. Everyone stay with us. I want to go back to the courthouse where Stephanie Gosk is there, and we're told Luigi Mangione is now in the courtroom. What are you seeing and hearing? What's our reporting?
Yeah, Christine, Luigi Mangione making his appearance a little bit late in the courtroom. He's wearing tan prison scrubs and he's shackled, unlike how we've been seeing him in the state court where he showed up in a suit and didn't look like he had just come out of prison. This is a very different scene here. Also, keep in mind, you have Brian Thompson's family, including his mother, in this courtroom right now. And this is the first time they are coming face to face with the man who allegedly killed Brian Thompson. And what we're being told right now in court is people are shaking their heads, that they have looks of perhaps anger on their faces. It's hard to imagine what must be running through their minds as this all plays out here today and how intense it must be, Christine.
All right, Steph, we'll continue to let you monitor what's happening there. And as Steph said, this is the first time Brian Thompson's family have been in the same room as the man accused of killing their son, although the federal charges are not an accusation necessarily point blank, Joe, of killing their son, but of stalking their son and leading to his demise. Remind me about Brian Thompson, the CEO of UnitedHealthcare, an Iowa kid from humble beginnings who rose to the top of corporate America.
Yeah, he grew up in the same state that you grew up in Iowa. He went to the University of Iowa. He eventually made his way to my home state, Minnesota, where he worked as a CPA for some time for an accounting firm. It was 2004, 20 years before his death, that he started working for UnitedHealthcare, held a number of positions there, was eventually elevated to the position of CEO, reaching that position in 2021, about 3 years before he was murdered. He was known as a guy, and I thought the New York Times interviewed someone who knew him well, who said he was the smartest guy in the room without being annoying. So that was kind of the way he was described. People who knew him called him BT. He was described as humble. He was described as a hard worker. He was an amateur wrestler, like a lot of people from Iowa and Minnesota. And he was known for even challenging colleagues to arm wrestling, according to some of the profiles about him. So clearly a beloved man. He had 2 young boys, and they all lived in Minnesota for quite a period of time, which is, of course, where UnitedHealthcare is based.
Yeah, of course. Let's go back to Stephanie. She's there following all the developments and what's happening now. We know this was all supposed to start at 11, a little bit behind schedule, but the judge has entered the courtroom.
That's right, Christine. The judge entered, asked everyone to rise, as is always the case in a courtroom, and the hearing is about to begin. And what can we start to look for? So the judge is going to start asking questions about this plea deal and is going to ask Luigi personally if he agrees to a plea deal. They're going to talk about the parameters of that deal. There are going to be questions on whether he understands what the process is going to be. And remember, we don't know what the parameters of this deal are going to be. So we don't know if he is going to plead guilty to both charges, one charge, or maybe something slightly different. So we will be waiting to hear. And the judge will then ask Luigi Mangione, in his own words, to describe what it is that he did. And keep in mind, he is going to be, in his own words, talking about this alleged crime with Brian Thompson's family listening to him in the courtroom. That drama is going to unfold. We also might hear how the family feels about this plea deal. They are allowed, as part of the federal process, to be a part of it. And we've already seen the U.S. attorney talking to the family, probably explaining what was going to happen over the course of this hearing. But it is happening right now as we speak, Christine.
Stand by. Let's go back to Barrett Berger. What, from the perspective of the prosecution, what's their thinking? What's happening right now?
Yeah, so in many ways, this will proceed, if in fact this is a guilty plea, in many ways this will proceed just like every other case does. By the time that they've reached the plea stage, the prosecutor's sort of hard work is kind of done. They'll explain to the judge the parameters of any agreement, if there is in fact an agreement. They'll also have to put forth on the record what the elements are, how they think that this agreement satisfies the element. They may have to put forth what they think the anticipated guideline range is, and that means what the potential sentence could be.
All right, let's go to Stephanie Gosk now. Steph, what do you got?
Yeah. So what we are now learning is that the judge asked Luigi Mangione, are you prepared to plead guilty to counts 1 and 2 of the indictment? So those are the 2 counts. Mangione said yes. So right now we have confirmation from Luigi Mangione that this is a plea deal, and he has agreed to plead guilty to both of those stalking charges leading to death.
Good morning. We are coming on the air with a major update in the case of accused CEO killer Luigi Mangione. Mangione in a federal courtroom right now for a high-stakes hearing where he has just informed a federal court judge that he will, in fact, plead guilty to 2 counts. He was charged with 2 counts of stalking related to a death back in 2024. He is in court right now. The judge asking him a series of questions, asking him, are you prepared to plead guilty to counts 1 and counts 2 of the indictment? Mangione answering yes. We should mention there are no cameras in federal courtroom, and so we are relying on our team of reporters who are fanned out all in downtown Manhattan. And so we're reading from notes that are being transcribed from our team there. The judge saying, I'm going to ask you some questions. It's essential that I'm comfortable. The judge required here to make sure that this plea is knowing and voluntary and that Mangione understands the gravity of what he is in fact pleading guilty to right now. Mangione was facing those federal stalking charges, as I mentioned, in connection with the killing of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson back of 2024. Today's development happening in federal court, but this is also happening just weeks before the state trial against Mangione was supposed to begin here in New York. That trial is supposed to begin on September 8th. In that case, it's a state case, different charges, a whole set of different legal ramifications, which we are going to unpack for you all throughout this morning. I'm going to bring in here NBC News legal analyst Misty Maris, who has been following this case and following along with us as we're unpacking the notes here. We had wondered what, in fact, would happen. We had seen potential plea talks collapse before in this case, but in fact, he is informing the judge that he will now, in fact, plead guilty today.
Yeah, and what's really interesting, Laura, is that the judge had asked, will you be pleading guilty to the 2 counts in the indictment? So there's been a lot of conjecture. What could a plea deal look like? Would prosecutors offer something, maybe some sort of lesser charge? That does not appear to be the case. Not surprising, given the severity of this case. But this means that he's pleading guilty to these federal stalking charges, which potentially carry a life sentence. Now, what we're seeing unfold in the courtroom, and again, we're via our notes. I wish we could watch it in person, but watching it unfold, this is going through the typical plea hearing process. The judge is asked, are you prepared to plead guilty to the indictment? Then you have the defendant talking about his mental state. Is there anything that has made it so he cannot competently enter into this plea deal today, asking a whole bunch of questions about whether or not he has taken any substances. This is to ensure that he's coming in, he's voluntary, of clear mind. This is all on the record. She'll be asking, did he have time to confer with his counsel? The next step will be going through the charges, the penalties. Then we will get to the meat, Laura. It will be the plea agreement. What has been agreed to between the prosecution and the defense. Now, what to listen for and watch for as this unfolds. There's going to be a factual basis for the plea. And when the judge says at the outset of this, as we see that Luigi Mangione intends to plead guilty, she's going to have questions. She's going to have to be satisfied. That factual basis means Luigi Mangione will have to admit to certain facts that fulfill all of the elements of a stalking charge, that fulfill the elements of the crime. And the judge is going to probe into that to make sure that what ends up on that record is sufficient for the plea. So just because the prosecution and the defense have agreed upon something, it still has to be approved by the judge in this case. So this judge is actively going to be involved in asking some questions about it.
Which would be a huge moment in any case. But in this case in particular, this is somebody whose attorneys have been aggressive, who have been zealous advocates time and again, saying that their client has done nothing wrong, saying that he is not guilty, that they are going to fight this tooth and nail. They've talked about why he shouldn't be prosecuted in all these jurisdictions. And yet in court today, he is rising as the judge is asking him a series of questions, saying, have your attorneys explain the guilty plea? Mangione saying yes, asking him, as you mentioned, satisfied with your attorneys, making sure that he's getting proficient counsel. Mangione saying yes, asking him, understanding that the Constitution and the laws, you have a right to plead not guilty. Do you understand? Mangione saying yes. Again, that you would not have to prove your innocence. That's the prosecution's burden. Mangione saying yes. All of these sort of series, the colloquy with the judge, all there to tease out, to make sure you understand what you're doing.
Exactly.
One of the most important things is going to be, after all this is said and done, he doesn't get to say, take back. He doesn't get to say, you know what, I was having second thoughts. That's why they have to go through this in such level of detail.
Absolutely. And that's why you're seeing this unfold. All of these constitutional rights that Luigi Mangione has as a defendant in the criminal justice system, he is waiving them. And the judge is going through one by one so that he understands what he is doing and what he is waiving moving forward. There will be a section where they'll talk about, well, you can't appeal this moving forward. Yeah. You understand that you're waiving those rights. And to your point, Laura, they don't want any wiggle room here. They don't want it to be that something was left outside in that courtroom, left out in that record that can support this determination if Luigi Mangione has buyer's regret one day. All of it will be in this court record, the judge meticulously going through all of these inquiries. And this part of the colloquy is really, really important regarding those constitutional rights. This is a part where it is made clear that you will be admitting guilt. The prosecutors will no longer have the burden to prove this.
Again, a first. We've never, ever, ever heard him do anything close to that. And not only is he doing it, he's doing it in open court in front of the victim's family, in front of Brian Thompson's family and colleagues.
Yes, and we saw some of the color from what we heard in the courtroom is that when he walked in, the family looked visibly upset when Luigi Mangione walked into the room. What was going to happen as this hearing unfolds, as this plea hearing unfolds, there's going to be a summary of this agreement. And this is something I really want to be paying attention to. Yeah. The language in this agreement. What do we have here? Now we know that Luigi Mangione is pleading guilty to the charges as they stand in the indictment. Because that is new information.
He could have pled to something else. Just because he was charged with stalking, resulting in death, doesn't mean that that's what he would have had to agree to. But so the fact that he's actually pleading to the thing he was indicted for is a big deal.
Yes, he's pleading guilty to the top charges. So a lot of times when you see a plea agreement, there's some kind of bargaining going on between the defense and the prosecution. The defense is saying, well, we will plead guilty. And it's all about penalty at the end of the day, right? It's all about what will the penalty be. We'll plead guilty to something lesser than these top charges, and you prosecutors will get the benefit of not having to go through the trial. Trial's unpredictable, all of that. Here, that is not the case. So we are seeing a guilty plea to the actual charges, the top-level charges that Luigi Mangione faces. So there had been a question mark about what that would look like. He's pleading guilty to these top charges. Those could potentially carry a life sentence. Doesn't look like, at least from where we see right now this unfolding, it doesn't look like there's anything to indicate that there's lesser charges that are even at play. That's out the window now. These are the top-level charges that he's pleading guilty to.
And again, top-level charges, we say it's stalking, but it is stalking resulting in death.
Correct.
It is a federal charge that is quite serious, that carries up to life in prison. So this is no small thing.
No small thing at all. So what I'm going to be listening for, and I'm curious about this as we get into now kind of the nuts and bolts here. The parties are announcing their appearances, which means we're going to be getting into some of the meat of what this plea agreement looks like. Okay, so now we know he's pleading guilty to the charges that he faces, top-level charges, no haircut there or anything. So that's what is going to be the actual plea that he will enter to those charges. Will there be something in that plea agreement that says prosecutors will make recommendations that will help him at sentencing, maybe agree to certain mitigating factors, maybe agreeing to making some kind of recommendation that would make this something less than life, which I think is probably the best that he could do under these particular circumstances from a defense perspective.
Because when people hear plea deal, I think some people think tit for tat, right? I got something, you got something. As if we're reading this right now, it appears prosecutors got exactly what they wanted, which is they're getting him to plead guilty in open court to the very same charges that they indicted him for. We don't yet know, though, what is he getting from this side of the bargain? What is he getting from this deal that he wouldn't have gotten otherwise? Because as of right now, in his, again, exchange with the judge here, the judge is saying, you give up your right to appeal. There will be no trial. I will sentence you after the pre-sentence report, which is something that probation puts together. It makes a series of recommendations. That's not going to happen today. But the judge, again, she's clarifying there will be no appeal. Do you understand that? And he's saying yes.
Yes, he's saying yes. He agrees to. And he agrees that he understands all of the constitutional rights that he is waiving. And this is really, really important. And again, Laura, that's why you have such an extensive back and forth with the judge in these cases to ensure that somebody who is waiving their rights to appeal, waiving constitutional rights as a criminal defendant, they know what they're doing. They've had the opportunity to speak to their counsel about it. They understand what this actually means. And that's why this part of the hearing, it seems procedural. It's incredibly important.
Well, because we have actually seen things in past high-profile cases in this moment actually break down, right? So it seems sort of pro forma, like she's going through all of these. He's saying yes. There have been times in cases you and I have covered where the judge is pressing them, and it turns out like, oh, actually, I didn't quite understand what I was giving up. And so it actually is necessary to go through all of this, even if it seems sort of rote.
You're absolutely correct. And that's such an important point. And all of this goes into the record. And the judge, ultimately, who's going to make that determination, the judge doesn't just have to be satisfied with what the parties, prosecution and defense agreed to with respect to all of the aspects of a plea agreement. The judge also has to be satisfied that this defendant is knowingly and voluntarily entering into that deal. And that's why you see such an intensive back and forth on all of these issues.
Yeah, I want to bring in here into the discussion NBC's senior national correspondent, Stephanie Gosk, who has been following this case from the very beginning. Stephanie, I remember those days during the manhunt where you were posted outside Altoona, Pennsylvania. You know this case as well as any of us. Right. Talk to me about the scene that is outside of court right now. Mangione has garnered an enormous amount of support since this case first happened. What are you seeing outside court?
Yeah, it has been pretty amazing, and no less so today. And there were people, Laura, who were lined up late at night to get a seat in this courtroom today. They used the courtroom, the largest courtroom in this federal courthouse, to fit everyone. We saw Brian Thompson's family be escorted into the courtroom through a side door, including his mother. We know that there are also UnitedHealthcare executives in that courtroom. Obviously, you have the federal prosecutors and the defense team. And then Luigi Mangione was brought in. He was shackled. He was wearing tan prison clothes. Now, during the state case, he has been showing up in a suit. He was striking a very different figure and is striking a very different figure in court today. And this is the first time, mind you, that Brian Thompson's family has been in the same room face to face with who we now know is the killer of Brian Thompson, because he has admitted to be involved in the death of Brian Thompson by admitting to these charges. What also has happened today, you are seeing the roadmap towards a federal and state trial in these cases be totally blown up. We were expecting a state trial September 8th, a federal trial in January, and now for certain the federal trial will not be taking place. But there are real questions now on whether the state trial will happen. At a bare minimum, you have to imagine that September 8th date is going to slide down the road. And there's a very good chance, because of double jeopardy law in the state of New York, which is quite robust and in favor of the defendant, that there could be no state trial at all. In other words, Luigi Mangione, the man who killed Brian Thompson brazenly in Midtown Manhattan in December 2024, will not actually stand trial for that crime.
Stephanie, as you mentioned, the family is in the courtroom. Colleagues of Brian Thompson are in the courtroom. This is really the first opportunity that I can think of where they have had a direct confrontation, obviously not talking face to face, but being in the room while he is pleading guilty to these crimes. This is a remarkable moment for this family.
Yeah, it's really hard to imagine, and you can't, and impossible, to put yourself in the shoes of his family, his mother sitting there watching Luigi Mangione stand up and say, yes, I am responsible for this death. We also really haven't heard from the executives of UnitedHealthcare and his family members since the immediate days after Brian Thompson's murder. You did hear from his wife, who said a few things, but other than that, they have been very silent along in this process. Now, as part of the federal plea deal process, the family of the victim is allowed to be a part of that process, to interject and have an opinion in that process. You could see before this hearing even began, the U.S. attorneys were conferring with the family, probably outlining what was going to happen over the course of this hearing. They are very much involved, and they are here today, and it has to be incredibly emotional and intense for them, Laura.
Incredibly emotional, and under the laws, Misty, they're actually required to be consulted about this.
Yes.
Now, they might object. They might say, oh, no, we actually want this to go to trial. The judge doesn't have to accept that, but the judge does have to be giving them a reasonable opportunity to be heard.
Yes. So the Crime Victims' Rights Act says prosecutors have to let the family know that there's a plea, that they have to consult and confer with the family, reasonable opportunity to be heard. All of that is absolutely true. And so the family would not be, blindsided by something like this, which is why we see them in the courtroom today. Something I think is really interesting going on in the courtroom. They're talking about penalty. The judge is saying this could be up to life. And in federal court, if you get life, there is no parole. That might not be the sentence. Also, if you have a state court case, it could be consecutive, meaning the two sentences might not run at the same time. So really letting Luigi Mangione know the import of, the gravity and what the potential penalty could be.
Talk to me quickly about the state case. You heard Stephanie mention it. The state case was supposed to happen on September 8th, just a few weeks from now. The timing of this really matters because now that he has in fact pleaded guilty and he will have a conviction on his record in federal court. Talk to me about the interplay and what he hopes that will do for him in the state case.
So this only works one way, Laura. Getting this federal case wrapped up, a plea, which is a conviction, means that Luigi Mangione and his defense team can take advantage of the New York state law on double jeopardy, which is way more expansive than its federal counterpart. So it only works if the federal case is resolved first while the state court case is pending. What the law says is that somebody cannot be prosecuted twice for a crime that is part of the same transaction or occurrence. So the defense team is undoubtedly going to use this plea. Timing matters. It's before the state case goes to trial to try and get the state case thrown out in its entirety.
You think we will see that today, even if we don't get the sentencing of Mangione today?
Yes, I think we will see a filing in state court that will say, we got to put this trial on pause while it plays out. Yes, right? Because state prosecutors are going to fight back on that double jeopardy. So that's going to take a while to play out. I think we'll see a filing immediately from the defense in that state case to say, we just pled guilty in the federal case. We're going to have to deal with the double jeopardy issue. That's not going to be resolved by the
And the judge doesn't want to seat a jury and go through a jury trial and have all of that happen, only to have it all fall apart because Mangione says, actually, no, you can't prosecute me in the state case, and then have an appeals court disagree with him.
Right. And then not to mention, double jeopardy is a fundamental right. So a question mark on that would give the judge incentive to say, we'll push this back while that all plays out.
Misty, appreciate your analysis. As always, so helpful. Steph, thanks to you, too. That concludes this NBC News special report. Our coverage continues on our streaming network, NBC News Now, online at NBCNews.com, and a full wrap-up, of course, tonight on Nightly News with Tom Yamas. I'm Laura Jarrett. Thank you for watching.
You've been watching an NBC News special report. Luigi Mangione preparing to plead guilty in the federal case against him. Those charges on your screen: interstate stalking resulting in death and stalking through use of interstate facilities resulting in death. The charges carry a maximum penalty of life in prison. The question now, what happens next, both with his sentencing and the state case, with 8 felony charges expected to begin next month. Joining us now is former Superior Court Judge and U.S. Attorney Carol Lamb and our whole team here. Let's go to talk to what's going on here right now, Joe Farah. We're looking at our reporters in the room and our producers in the room have been sending notes back and forth about what's actually happening inside the room, and we've been following along.
Yeah, a reminder, this is federal court. Cameras are not allowed in court, so we have our team in there. They are able to access a Google document, so we're able to watch as they're typing. And literally right now, Mangione is starting to speak, according to our team there. We don't have much about what's being said, but I can just tell you the first words we're hearing out of his mouth after answering a series of questions, saying yes and no to various questions. After years of enduring severe pain with the back and witnessing the healthcare system, on December 4th, I went to an investor conference, specific location that was not publicly disclosed. The judge interrupts, I can't hear you, and he continues to speak. We don't have any more than that right now, but this is certainly going to be perhaps the most captivating part of this, is actually hearing Mangione say what happened as he prepares to lay out this guilty plea. Leading up to this moment, the judge has been asking a series of questions over the course of several minutes. First, trying to better understand sort of his state of mind and make sure that he's in condition, asking, have you been treated for addiction, any drugs, alcohol, or pills in the last 2 days? And Mangione said, I took sleep medication. The judge following up to make sure, is your mind clear? Are you okay? And the judge determining that he felt he was okay, that the defendant was fully competent to enter the plea at this time. And then just making sure he understood what he was giving up by entering this plea here, understanding that if there was a trial, he could object to certain evidence, that he would have the right to testify or not to testify. And a key moment that came down in just the last few moments here, right before Mangione started to speak, was the judge saying, I have this letter from your attorneys that was given to the prosecutor. He asked him if he'd seen it and discussed it. The government saying 292 to 365 months imprisonment is what's listed in that letter. So that's 24 to 30 years here. Those are the government's guidelines. They're not binding. Most importantly, they're not binding for me. In the end, the judge is going to come up with the range on what the sentence is for these charges, saying I may agree with them, I may not agree with them. And he wanted to make sure Mangione understood. Has anyone made any promises to you? Mangione saying, no, no one has made any promises to me about that. So we continue to hear Mangione speaking about traveling to Manhattan, saying he had emailed UnitedHealthcare leadership, posing as an investor with millions in assets, saying he received a response before traveling to New York. He used a 3D printer to make this gun and silencer. A reminder, this was a ghost gun here. He emailed UnitedHealthcare with the intent to shoot Brian Thompson on the morning of December 4th. He says, I shot Mr. Thompson in Manhattan in the back. I understood my actions would place him in fear of death and bodily injury. I knew what I was doing. And those are the last words we've heard so far.
Let's go back to the courthouse. Stephanie Gosk is there. She's been reporting on all of this. What's happening now? What are the new details, Steph?
Yeah, what's important here, Christine, right now is that you have the prosecutors with this recommended sentencing. And you heard Joe just say it, 292 to 365 months. Well, on the upper end of that, that's 30 years. Luigi Mangione's 28. That is not a life sentence. Now, in federal court, it is the judge in a plea deal that is going to determine the sentencing. So it is going to be in her hands ultimately. And you heard her tell that to Luigi Mangione. But it is also important to hear that the prosecutor's recommendation is not life, which is an interesting twist in this. We had assumed all along they were going for life. Remember, they were initially looking for a capital sentence. They were looking for the death penalty in this case. That charge got thrown out. And now they're saying upwards of 30 years in prison. So that is a very different tune, Christine.
And one wonders what the family of Brian Thompson thinks about that, because there's a state case where there are a whole bunch of charges, Steph, for a state case, the trial that was supposed to begin, September 8th? And we don't know what happens now with this guilty plea.
Yeah, what we do know is that there's going to be a whole other process now in state court. That September 8th start date for the trial is at a bare minimum going to move down the road, most likely, because now they have to settle this issue of double jeopardy, and that's going to be up to the state judge. And in the New York State, the protections for the defendant are robust when it comes to double jeopardy. And it could mean that there ends up being no state trial at all in this case. We just don't know how the judge is going to rule on that. But because of the way the law is written, it is in Luigi Mangione's favor. And no doubt that was part of his defense team's strategy, this plea deal in federal court, Christine.
All right, Steph, we'll let you continue to gather information and facts. Angela, I want to bring in you here. So this really throws the state prosecution, those felonies for this on the state case, up in the air.
Yeah, it's very possible, but I want to note that it's definitely not guaranteed. And I think as we heard Joe's reporting, the fact that we heard Mangione say that he knew what he was doing and that there was intent to kill, that is very important for the second-degree murder charge that is happening in state. So now the question of whether or not double jeopardy will apply has to do with whether or not that same transaction really occurred. And the issue is the stalking charges are really just about hunting, right? They're not actually about the killing, whereas a murder charge is about the killing. Now, hearing him say in court, or not hearing, but hearing the reporting of it, that he is admitting to knowing that he did it and knowing that there was intent is also dangerous for this murder charge. If indeed it does not get thrown out, does not get tossed for double jeopardy reasons, he essentially has admitted that he did commit murder. So the possibility there is still that he could be convicted for murder in state court.
Let me bring in Barrett Berger, former federal prosecutor and legal analyst. Barrett, when you've been listening to all of this unfold here, Luigi Mangione saying that he is prepared to plead guilty to these two federal charges. You've heard what we've heard from prosecutors about potential penalties, although that will come later. What do you make of this?
Yeah, I'm not surprised that he's essentially getting no break with this plea. This is a U.S. Attorney's Office that I would have been shocked if they had given him any kind of a sweetheart deal here. So he's essentially pleading to both of the top counts. He's essentially pleading to the indictment here just with the plea agreement. So the federal prosecutors are actually getting a huge benefit out of this. The first being they get the fact that he has waived his right to an appeal. So even if they were able to convict him at trial, even if the evidence was as strong as we all suspected it was, there's always a risk on appeal that there was some sort of deficiency in your legal argument. Now they don't have to worry about that. This conviction will be solid. They don't have to stress about that. And also they have the ability to secure a pretty significant sentence. You know, people may be surprised that it's not a life sentence. This is not necessarily the prosecutor's choice. This is a range that's determined by the Sentencing Commission. There's a book that lays out what the various guidelines are for each offense. So it's a pretty mathematical calculation based on his criminal history and what the offense is. Now, at the time of
Barrett, I'm going to have to cut you off there for just a second. Our Stephanie Gosk is at the courthouse with some more information. I want to get to her live. Hi, Steph.
Hey, Christine. So critically, the judge just agreed to the plea deal. So that was what we were waiting for. The judge has agreed to the plea deal. Right before that was the other thing that we've been talking about this morning, and that's the allocution, where Luigi Mangione was asked by the judge to explain what he did. And his description is chilling. I'm going to read a little bit of it. This is from our producer who's in court transcribing it. He said this. Luigi Mangione said this. In November, I traveled to Manhattan. I emailed UHC leadership, that's UnitedHealthcare leadership, posing as an investor with millions in assets. I received a response before traveling to New York. He says he used a 3D printer to make a gun and silencer. He then emailed UHC back, and he had the intent, he told the judge, of shooting Brian Thompson on the morning of December 4th, 2024. He says, I shot Mr. Thompson in Manhattan in his back. Keep in mind, as Luigi Mangione is saying this, Christine, Brian Thompson's family is in that courtroom listening to this chilling description. I understand, according to Luigi Mangione, my actions would place him in a fear of death and bodily injury. That's obviously very specific legal language that he is using. I knew what I was doing was illegal. That is what the judge was listening to. That is what could potentially be used in the state case. Him outlining the crime itself, Christine.
And we're hearing, Steph, that sentencing has been set for Friday, December 18th at 11 a.m. So this federal case, clearly with some major movement here today. I want to bring in NBC News senior legal correspondent Laura Jarrett, NBC News legal analyst Misty Maris. Laura, so wow, just a lot of developments here today. So let's talk about what has just happened, and then let's talk about what this means for what was supposed to happen on September 8th, which is a state trial with 8 felony charges, including second-degree murder, which we're told the family wanted to see a murder conviction here.
This is an incredible moment. This is the first time we have heard Luigi Mangione, in his own words, say anything at all, much less provide a robust description of how he, in his own words, is saying he traveled to Manhattan. This is a level of premeditation that we have never heard from Mangione before, because, again, until this day, he has been pleading not guilty. He has maintained his innocence. His lawyers have been aggressive. And yet all today, All of that has just changed. He's describing, Christine, not only how he traveled to Manhattan, but how he's actually corresponding with executives at UnitedHealthcare, posing as an investor, creating a ghost gun, using a silencer. Again, all of these details are things we have heard before, but yet they're really going to matter when it comes to the state case. Because in the state case, he's not charged with stalking, Christine. He's charged with second-degree murder, and he's charged with weapons charges. And so when he's talking about the weapons and how he made them and how he's using them in the federal case, he's doing it for a reason. And he's doing it so that when he runs over to state court, probably later today, he can say, see, it was all-encompassing. That deal in federal court, it was robust. It was all-encompassing. So you cannot prosecute me for the same state crime.
And Misty, the judge has agreed to this plea deal. They have a sentencing date, Friday, December 18th. Your thoughts here on the defense's strategy? I mean, the defense has won kind of along the way. They got some charges dropped, and now they've got this guilty plea here in federal court that may upend the state charges.
Yeah, so they've really narrowed what the charges are. As you said, they got the death penalty thrown out in federal court. They got the terrorism charges thrown out in state court. So now they've pled guilty. And this is really strategic, Christine, because it only works one way when it comes to the double jeopardy rules, because the New York law on double jeopardy is the one that's more expansive. So the federal case being done now, we have a plea deal. That's a conviction. Now they can, as Laura said, go to the state court and say, this is the same crime. You cannot charge me twice. That has to be thrown out. Now, that's absolutely going to be a fight between the defense and the prosecutors. But look what they've done. They're pleading guilty. By the way, Luigi Mangione could still get a life sentence because that's what the sentencing guidelines would allow. A sentence is ultimately up to the judge. And that was very clear during this plea hearing that you understand the maximum penalty here is life without the possibility of parole, correct? And he said yes. So if they get the state charges thrown out, though, now it's done. It's finality. They know what they're doing. There's a benefit to potentially being in the federal system, maybe better conditions. When sentencing comes, Luigi Mangione is going to be able to say, I took accountability. That will be a mitigating factor. So there's definitely things that inure to his benefit. And let's not forget, there's a ton of evidence in this case. So getting rid of the state case, that would be a win for the defense.
Ladies, stick with me. Stephanie Gosk wants to get in. She's got some new information at the courthouse. Hey, Steph.
Hey, Christina, I just want to say that one of the things that really stands out in his description of what happened in the lead up to this murder is him saying he posed as an investor with millions in assets and that he was in touch with UnitedHealthcare. And one of the lingering questions about this crime generally was why Luigi Mangione knew, or how he knew, to be on the street so early in the morning. Now, that investor conference was set to begin 8 o'clock, 8:30, 9 in the morning. Brian Thompson was making his way to that hotel at around 6 a.m. and Luigi Mangione was there. And this illuminates to some degree how he knew where to be, when to be there, and how he had some of these details that really had not been publicized yet. So some real light on that build up to that horrible crime that was captured by security cameras and that we've all seen so many times.
And just thanks, Steph. And just, guys, the premeditation involved there. I will tell you that since that event in 2024, there's not a CEO in America that doesn't have security, armed security in most cases. And in fact, they are very careful about the traffic, the email traffic that's going to so many of those, because this was such a shocking crime that this CEO, father of 2 kids, could just be gunned down and brought in early morning in Manhattan. Let's go back to what we're hearing more about Luigi Mangione. We're hearing his words read in court to us. Tell us more about what he is saying happened.
Yeah, it's interesting. We all want cameras in the courtroom. Today of all days is a day that we want cameras in the courtroom, because I'm so looking forward to seeing what our producers say about what is his tone. Is it monotone? Is there an affect to it? Right? We just haven't heard that much from him. But he is going through at least some level of detail. And then the prosecutors are talking about him arriving on bus and following him and the video, and then arriving in Pennsylvania. Again, some of the facts we've heard heard, but we just have never heard them in his own words. Now, of course, all of this is carefully choreographed with his lawyers. He's not just like sort of freelancing this speech that he's giving in court right now. Every word that is coming out of his mouth, Christine, serves a purpose.
You know, Misty, it's so interesting to me because there is a time that these two prosecutions were operating independently of each other and were operating as if each were the only upcoming case against Luigi Mangione. If you're the state prosecutors, how are you feeling right now?
I am starting to draft my opposition to the motion for double jeopardy to get this case thrown out for that ask for dismissal that is just so predictable right now. As far as the state prosecutors are concerned, they want to be able to prosecute Luigi Mangione for murder. Those are the state charges. They want to bring justice for Brian Thompson and his family. They've made that very clear through a very aggressive state level prosecution. So they're absolutely going to be opposing the defense asking for that state court trial to be thrown out. And Christine, it's not really a slam dunk. You know, this is what I would call a calculated risk by Luigi Mangione's defense team. Because on one hand, okay, he's pled guilty to the federal charges. He could get some credit for doing so. Maybe he gets something less than life. And they try and get the state court case thrown out. There's no guarantee that that will actually happen. There's an exception to that rule about the same transaction or occurrence, and it's that the other prosecution, in this case the state prosecution, seeks to remedy a different type of harm, or there's different elements to the charges. That is why when Laura is talking about the strategy in this factual allocution, Luigi Mangione, in his own words, saying what happened, he's including facts that would tend to give him a better argument on that state double jeopardy motion, because he's saying all this stuff, shooting Brian Thompson, that is all part of my federal plea deal. You can't prosecute me twice. But that is by no means something that is just going to necessarily go away. That will be another legal fight.
We know the family of Brian Thompson is in the courtroom for the first time in the same room as the man who has now just admitted that his stalking action led to the death of Brian Thompson. We know that the parents or the family of Brian Thompson were talking to the U.S. attorneys. One wonders how the family must feel about what has happened here today, especially if they want to see a murder charge.
Well, and it'll be interesting because they do have a reasonable opportunity to be heard, and it's sentencing. Most definitely, I would expect that we would hear from them. We often see in these types of cases a victim impact statement. Some of them can be quite emotional and powerful, where the victim gets up and not only talks about what that has happened to their loved one, but has talked about what that loss has meant for their life. And so I would expect in a case like this, it would not be at all unusual to hear from the victim's family at sentencing.
Yeah.
But we don't yet know, and I'm sure this will come out through reporting, we don't yet know, did they object to this? Did they tell federal prosecutors, please do not do this? We want a federal trial. Or are they hoping they're still going to get some vindication in the state case? Maybe they're hoping, since that's the second-degree murder case, that one will still go forward and they'll still see justice in that way. That's something we're going to have to try to report out.
Remind us why there are two cases. Why? I mean, normally these sorts of cases are charged at the state level. Am I right?
Yes, murder cases are generally falling under state jurisdiction, but there's this doctrine called dual sovereignty, which means if there is a federal theory that fits the facts of the case, a federal case can be brought as well. So here, the reason that you even see federal charges is that he crossed state lines in order to get to Brian Thompson and ultimately commit that murder. So that then falls under that federal jurisdiction. Now, the defense has been arguing and, shouting from the rooftops, especially since the death penalty is taken off the table. It's the stalking charges in federal court, murder charges in state court, that there should not be two prosecutions. And that's always been their argument with regard to double jeopardy. But the cases remain because of that doctrine of dual sovereignty. And Christine, that's why the timing, this is not lost on us, that this federal plea deal is happening before that state court case, because they only derive the benefit because the state law is a little bit broader on that front.
And then there's the backdrop of the spectacle of all of this. Yeah. Somebody deboning a fish in line today.
We noticed that too.
I mean, just some of
the amount of money that he has raised to the tune of $1.5 million for his legal defense fund. Legions of people showing up to court whenever there's a court hearing, even if it's something routine. People who are camped out there in support of him. People who are saying, I too was hurt by the health insurance industry. again, this is a murder case.
Yeah.
This is now an on-the-record killing of a human being, but people are talking about their experience with the healthcare industry and how it has wronged them. It's quite remarkable, what this has pulled out in people.
Totally. And, you know, when you're talking about prosecutors coming to the table and engaging in these negotiations with the defense, and you say, well, we've got a video of him shooting Brian Thompson in cold blood on the street. Why would you even entertain it? Well, part of it is that trial is truly an unpredictable thing. And I can't think of a case that is more unpredictable to seat a jury and we've been covering cases together for so many years. This case has just really made that mark as far as what you see outside the courtroom, that legal defense fund. And who knows what could happen if you do seat a jury? Do you get that stealth juror who wants to be there so that they can upend a potential verdict? Do you see this movement online of what's called jury nullification? There's a whole movement where people are promoting and letting people know what jury nullification is, which means you think they're guilty, but for a bigger public policy reason, you find them innocent. You don't listen. So all of that, this backdrop, it helps you to understand why we don't know what the family's position is, but there is some degree when you know there's finality, there's no appeal, you don't have to sit in court and hear all of this 2 times potentially.
Especially if he gets life,
case.
right? If he wasn't going to get the death penalty anyway, if he does in fact get life, which will be up to the judge. But the real question is, what happens with that state case? Because if they were banking on him still going forward in the state case and the family was okay with the federal plea under the assumption that he would still go forward in the state case, that could all be up in debate. I just don't see how that case goes forward anytime soon.
I mean, when you talk about all the evidence in this case, it's almost overwhelming. The video. Now, he's admitted to sending emails where he found out exactly where Brian Thompson was going to be. And then there's the backpack in the Altoona, Pennsylvania McDonald's, which had sort of
the writings.
The writings, basically, a play-by-play. I'm just trying to always put myself in the minds of the family of the deceased. And, you know, did they want something more? We just don't know.
Yeah, we don't know. We know that they were in the courtroom today, and we know from the reporting that there were people from UnitedHealthcare there also. So that's interesting. And that, because the victims in these cases have to be informed, they have to be advised, their opinion is taken into consideration by prosecutors. But it's important to note, while they have the ability to communicate the way they want things to unfold when it comes to a plea deal, it's ultimately up to prosecutors' prosecutorial discretion to make that call. So we might see more about that, though, kind of get a feel for what the position was at sentencing.
And we're going to learn more. You know, the probation department will interview him. And as a part of that, we'll get a lot more information about what happened to this man. What happened to this man who came from a well-to-do family, who starts his immediate sort of colloquy with, after years of enduring severe pain with back and witnessing the healthcare system, the first words out of his mouth is excuses for why he has done this, which I think is fascinating positioning. But what happened in that period in his life where everything seemed to be okay, and then he ends up doing something like this? And there's this dark period of his life that we still have not fully unpacked.
And this story is not over, because now there will be legal wrangling for what happens next in the state trial. Both of you, thank you so much. Thanks to everyone who joined us today. Luigi Mangione pleading guilty to federal charges in the killing of UnitedHealthcare CEO Brian Thompson. Sentencing now set for December. NBC News Daily picks up all of this breaking news after a very quick break.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.